Welcome back to MMA Al Dente. I'm here to talk about Ricky Glenn versus Christos Giagos. It's a fight between two guys that are kind of like middle of the pack of the UFC, but they're middle of the pack because they've stepped on plenty of heads and kicked plenty of guys out of the UFC to remain in the UFC. Of course, Giagos has been kicked out of the UFC himself, but he's fought his way back, and here he might be fighting for his job for all I know. He's got two losses recently to Arman Tsarukyan and Thiago Moises. Those are two really good fighters. No shame in losing to either, but two losses in a row and a third one to Ricky Glenn, that might be it for him. I don't know. But Giagos, he's a capable fighter, and I think he's got a good shot at winning this. I'll admit I'm picking against him. I'm picking Ricky Glenn by decision, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if Giagos was able to win. Giagos has 10 losses, 2 come by TKO, 5 by submission, 3 by decision. They're all to really good fighters, and most of them in the UFC over 2 stints. Chris Wade and Drakkar Klose beat him by decision. He's been submitted by Thiago Moises, Charles Oliveira, Gilbert Burns, Jason Gonzalez, former UFC fighter. And the only two guys that knock him out are Arman Tsarukyan in the last one, and Josh Emmett got him out of there in round 3 in the first fight of his after he left the UFC the first time around. No shame in getting knocked out by either one of those guys. Arman Tsarukyan, I know maybe people don't think about him as a striker first and foremost, but he's got really good striking, and man, he just clipped Giagos with the perfect left hand and then he pounced on him with beautiful ground and pound, really, or whatever you want to call it. It was kind of like ground and pound, but he hit him with power shots from both arms. So there was no shame in losing that one there. But Giagos is a little more vulnerable, certainly more vulnerable than Ricky Glenn. Giagos has been finished 7 times in 29 fights. Ricky Glenn's been finished twice in 30 fights. So Giagos is definitely more vulnerable, even though you could argue he's fought the better competition. Ricky Glenn has still fought good competition as well. He's only been taken out twice, both by submission. Once to Lance Palmer, who is he's an incredible fighter. Team alpha male guy, could have been in the UFC for the last 7 years and probably would have been awesome. But the other loss, I don't know, it was early on, and I never saw it. And then he's got 4 losses by decision. He lost to Evan Dunham, Miles Jury, Kevin Aguilar, and some other jerk-off. But Ricky Glenn is historically very tough. And when he does his winning, it's more via TKO. He's got 13 TKOs in his 22 victories, just 3 submission victories, and of course 6 decisions. He's also got 2 draws, the last of which came to Grant Dawson, who is kicking ass and taking names in the UFC, and Ricky Glenn almost took his soul in round 3. Ricky Glenn was being dominated. He was down 2 rounds in that fight, and man, he had a 10-8 round. Almost killed him in that 3rd round, and really poured it on, and it was a great look. And Ricky Glenn's got some other comebacks. He has this nice comeback in the WSOF, now the PFL, over Alexander Pimentel, who's this former fighter, jiu-jitsu guy, really good jiu-jitsu guy, really slick jiu-jitsu, but also a capable athlete, one of those guys who can throw down. I don't want to make him sound like Jacare, but he was definitely a very good fighter. And Ricky Glenn was down 2 rounds and caught him with a big left hand and knocked him out in round 3. And he was the only guy to beat that guy, actually, Ricky Glenn, up until the guy's last fight, where he retired on a decision loss to Christos Giagos. How cool is that? Giagos retired him with a decision, and that's one of Giagos' quiet victories. Giagos has 19 wins. He's finished 11 of them, 7 via TKO, 4 via submission, and 8 via decision. But Giagos is a very capable fighter, more versatile, I'd say. Certainly on paper, he's more of a submission threat than Ricky Glenn. But these guys can both battle everywhere, and I expect this to be a close fight. Gun to my head, I'd go with Ricky Glenn by decision. I just trust more his cardio, and I do trust his striking more than Giagos. Giagos, I do think, is a better athlete, but Ricky Glenn will be 2 inches taller, but also have he'll be giving up an inch of reach, which is interesting, especially for a guy that I perceive to be more athletic, like Giagos. So Giagos is definitely in this fight. I think athletically he's capable, and even though Giagos is more vulnerable, he's only been finished twice by strikes, and they were to Arman Sarukian's insane barrage in round 1 after dropping him, and Josh Emmett in round 3. So Ricky Glenn, they wouldn't, even though he's more of a knockout artist, Ricky Glenn, I don't know if he's got the power to get Giagos out of there. And from there, Giagos is the more athletic guy. So he's certainly capable of winning, but I'm still going with Ricky Glenn, and I'm not betting on this fight. I had it in my head I'd be betting on it. I'd be betting on Glenn to win by decision, which you can get at plus 120, by the way. But I'm staying away from this one. Too much can happen, and stylistically, I think Giagos is much more in this fight. It actually might just be value on Giagos flat, but I haven't bet on that either. Like, share, subscribe, all that horse shit. Check out my other videos.